Hey everybody, it's Amir Zahir. And for white people, that's Amr Zar. And for Amnesty International, that's... This week, Amnesty International issued a report that documented Israel's long record of racial discrimination against Palestinians. The premier human rights group took the important step of labeling Israel as an apartheid state. Our report reveals the true extent of Israel's apartheid regime. Whether they live in Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the rest of the West Bank, or Israel itself, Palestinians are treated as an inferior racial group and systematically deprived of their rights. We found that Israel's cruel policies of segregation, dispossession, and exclusion across all territories under its control clearly amount to apartheid. The international community has an obligation to act. This statement was made by Amnesty's boss, their Secretary General, Agnes Calamard. What? It's French? Calamard. I can't say it, it's French. Kullu marad. Now, Dr. Agnes is not just any human rights expert. She just came from the UN, where she was in charge of investigating extrajudicial killings, including the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Now I'll skip the part where I'm frustrated because Palestinians have been saying this stuff for years and people only start listening when Jewish, American, and European groups say the same thing. I mean, in this case, it's a French CEO of a British human rights group. It's like Sykes-Picot and Balfour all got together in a room and realized how much they fucked everything up. By the end. I'm gonna forget about all that. Instead, I'm just gonna go straight to the part where Israel loses its mind because that's just, well, it's more fun. So let's go through Israel can't be apartheid arguments. Israel can't be apartheid because the Palestinian population keeps growing in the West Bank, Gaza, Israel, and everywhere else. Okay, Israel, just saying I'm bad at ethnic cleansing, that's not a really good excuse. Okay, just because you're bad at something doesn't mean you're not trying to do it. I've been trying to lose these 20 pounds for like 5 years. I haven't been successful, but I'm still trying to displace, dispossess, and ethnically cleanse all this fat. Also, we teach every first-year law student something really simple, okay? If you point a gun at somebody's head and you shoot and you miss, you still go to jail forever. It's the thought that counts. Then there's this one. Israel can't be apartheid because Arabs live a good life in Israel. They even have people in the Knesset. Yes, there are a number of Palestinians in the Israeli parliament. But do you know when the first black people entered the US Congress? 1870. And do you know when Congress finally passed the Civil Rights Act? 1965. That's 95 years later, all right? Israel isn't even that old. And finally, we have the most used line. Israel can't be apartheid because, well, you're anti-Semitic, and you're anti-Semitic, and you're anti-Semitic, and you're anti-Semitic, and you're anti-Semitic. This one's starting to get old, and it's kind of dangerous. Anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish discrimination is a real thing. Synagogues get attacked. Jews get murdered for being Jews. It's horrific. It's almost always done by white supremacists, by the way, not Palestinians. Criticism of Israel, however, is not anti-Semitic. Even deep foundational criticism of Israel and Zionism is not anti-Semitic. If I say I don't believe in a Jewish state on the ancestral homeland of another people, even if it's the ancestral homeland of Jewish people too, that's not anti-Semitic. Saying that every Palestinian should be able to return to their homelands unconditionally, even if it messes up the Jewish demographic majority that you're going for, that's not anti-Semitic. I mean, I get it. Saying those things might sound terrible if you love apartheid, but it's not anti-Semitic. Should Palestine be a homeland for Jews? Sure. It always has been. Should Palestine be a safe haven for Jews? Sure. Should Palestine be transformed into a Jewish state where Jews get more rights, more land, and more liberty, all at the expense of the indigenous Palestinian population that has lived there centuries upon centuries? No, big no, that's racist. This isn't very complicated. Only Jews can drive on certain roads. Only Jews can return and become citizens. Only Jews can buy and develop most of the land. And that's just a few examples. Now, if no one else was there when they got there, all these rules and laws would be weird and they'd still be racist. But when millions of natives are deprived of basic civil and human rights, deprived of the protection of the laws from the government that decides their daily living conditions because they're the wrong race, religion, or ethnicity, we have a name for that. And Amnesty knows it. It's apartheid. Now, Amnesty, as I noted before, is not the first group to make this apartheid determination about Israel. First, it was Palestinian human rights groups, then it was Jewish human rights groups, then it was American human rights groups, and now it's British human rights groups. Israel's basically the Bill Cosby of nations. I mean, they can't all be lying, right? No, they can't. And by the way, Bill Cosby's victims didn't hate black people. They hated what he did. And finally, it's a good time to remind everybody that while Palestinians have been at the forefront of our narratives, we have never been alone. On the day after Christmas, we lost Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He stood with justice and morality in Palestine until the end, despite the incessant attacks and accusations of anti-Semitism. Maybe Amnesty learned a few things from Archbishop Tutu. He said, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." Maybe Amnesty did learn a few things from Archbishop Tutu. That apartheid-fighting, Nobel Peace Prize winning black archbishop, he wasn't lying about the apartheid he saw in South Africa, and he wasn't lying about what he said was the same thing he saw in Palestine.
It reminds me so much of what used to happen in South Africa, where people were evicted from their homes and their homes were taken over by whites. And you would see someone say, "You see that house? That used to be my home."
And he said one more thing that every Palestinian has been saying since 1948, and that every lover of justice should be saying loudly today. I wish I could shut up, but I can't, and I won't. Thanks for watching.
Justice will prevail.